Missy, thanks so much for meeting with me. I was hoping that we could just spend a couple minutes talking about your referral to the problem-solving team and really get some good information to be able to take into that initial meeting. Does that work for you?
Works great.
Okay, so on your initial, you had a couple concerns about reading for Chandler, but that most of that was centering around behavior. So tell me a little bit about your concerns within the classroom.
Well, I see her not completing her work when it comes to independent work time during literacy. I have her in my literacy class, and a lot of times I will model to them what I want them to go back to their seats and do, and a lot of it's just short answer responses, and she'll go back to her desk and she'll start on it, and she hardly ever finishes it. She tends to stare at the walls, look up at the ceiling, talk to her neighbor, play with things in her desk. She's just not completing any of her work.
How has that been impacting her assessments and her grades overall?
Well, I do use a reading assessment right here, and I read them the question, and then they have to fill in the answers. I also read them the question for a short answer response. She does all right at the beginning. Short answer responses, she hardly ever finishes. Towards the third page, she's just done. She does not finish. I also have done the Dibbles assessment on her with the nonsense word fluency. She's at a 40-10, which makes her a strategic right now, a high strategic. She needs to be at 50-15 by the middle of the year.
Is she engaged? Is she doing okay with one-on-one assistance? I know that was one of the things that
she does all right. I don't have a whole lot of time to give her one-on-one assistance. During whole group instruction, she sits right in front of me, and so I tend to call on her a lot. I make sure she's understanding what we're doing, and she's paying attention more there than when she goes back to her desk and has to do her independent work time.
So based on the data, do you think she's capable of completing the work that you give her?
I think that she is capable of doing it. I think she's unfocused, and that's why she's not completing it.
Okay. And you see it mostly in literacy. Is it not there or not as pronounced in the other areas?
Well, in writing and math, it's towards the beginning of the year, so I do a lot of modeling with them. Writing, a lot of modeling. I'm showing it the whole group. They don't do a whole lot of independent work, so I'm not seeing it there. Math, we're just, we're just using the numbers and adding 1 + 1, so I'm not seeing it too much in that area right now.
Have you talked at all with her parents about your concerns with work completion?
Well, behavior log goes home every day, so her parents, her mom and dad, and I stay in constant communication where we're writing notes to each other, emails, or the phone, and they're seeing the same behavior at home where she's not wanting to complete her work.
Really? Okay, intervention you've already done? This is great. Tell me about this.
So I've done this reward chart, sticker chart, and I've done it numerous times before in my class, and what it counts is how many times she gets work completed. So
these are independent assignments during literacy? Okay.
So if she gets her work done, then she'll get a sticker there. And every time she gets a sticker down, she gets a rock shop ticket to use at the rock shop store.
Great.
So she wants to get her work done, but it's taking her a long time to get it done. And even when I redirect her, she gets back on task, but then it takes a couple minutes and she's off task again. And you can tell in her assessments that, even her reading assessment, she starts out great, and then it's by the third and fourth page.
Falls apart.
Yes.
In the data that you've collected on the work completion piece, you said that she loved getting the rewards.
She does.
But it doesn't necessarily seem like, just in glancing at this, that it's really made that much of a difference in terms of how much work she's actually completing.
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. You can tell, even in the grade book and in her assessments, that it hasn't really changed that much over the past month when I've started this reward chart.
It sounds like, and let me know if you agree, that she definitely wants to be able to complete her work. I mean, we both know she's a great student to have in class and really wants...
Helpful. I mean, she's very helpful and wants to, stay in and sharpen pencils and help me with the calendar. So she's very helpful.
So that she wants to complete her work, but that perhaps there's something that keeps her out of focus and keeps her off task, and she doesn't have a lot of control over that.
Yes, off task is perfectly said. That's what I think.
We were talking about the not completing work because of the unfocus, but perhaps because she's not able to focus her attention or refocus herself independently, that's why that work completion isn't getting done, and that's why we're not seeing progress here.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay, so when we meet, and we have a meeting next week with parents and with the problem-solving team, so if we're able to, at that point, I will, in the plan, write down that we're thinking that it's really an issue of not being focused and that that's impacting her ability to complete work.
I would like that, yes.
Okay.
And I will make sure that I'll let parents know that they're more than welcome to come to the meeting.
Great, that would be really wonderful. I'd like to hear what they're doing at home to try to help too.
Kind of work together.
Right. Now, the other thing that I will do, if it's okay with you, is come in a couple times before that meeting to take some baseline data for on-task behavior so that we can really see how much of a gap there is between her and her peers. And from what it sounds like, in terms of the number of redirections you're giving her, she's definitely off task a much higher percentage of time than peers.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, then I will come in and do that, and I'll have that data by the time we meet for the meeting.
Great.
And we'll see what we can put in place. Sound okay?
That sounds great.
All right,
Thank you for all
thank
your
you.
help.
Mrs. Thomas, thank you so much for coming to our meeting. This is the school's problem-solving team, and it's comprised of a group of staff members from the school, and our goal is to be able to provide targeted support to students who need it, whether that be in reading, writing, behavior, math, or accelerated issues. Why don't you go ahead and start us off and talk a little bit about Chandler's strengths and some of what you've seen in the classroom recently.
Well, as we have talked, Chandler has a great sense of humor. She's kind to all the other students. She's always willing to help out in the classroom, and she has a strength in the area of math.
And Missy and I, in discussing before this meeting, and I know that you guys have talked a lot about it too, she is wonderful to have in class, but we're having some difficulties with some of her behavior. And in particular, really having a difficult time with staying on task. And when Missy and I talked, that came out that it's really happening during the literacy block, and especially then during independent work. So when she's with Missy and sitting during direct instruction, or when Missy's up at the board, she's really able to hang in there quite a bit. But then when it comes to finishing a test or working on a worksheet, anything like that, Chandler may be looking at a poster on the wall, or maybe fidgeting in her desk, or maybe talking to a neighbor. And so it's really been a difficult to get her to be able to complete the amount of work that she needs to complete and to be able to get grades. Is that?
Definitely. And, as they go into second and third grade and fourth grade, independent work happens a lot more than it does in first grade, so.
And then at one point when we talked, we thought that maybe it wasn't so much the focus as the actual work itself. Now, in talking to Missy, it's not an issue of not being able to do the work or not be able to understand the work. She's just below grade level, but is making strides to get on grade level. So she's a strategic learner in regards to literacy. But the work is just not getting completed. It's not that she can't do it, but that she's engaging in some of those other behaviors. Have you seen that at home?
Oh, yes. I mean, she's quite capable of doing the homework by herself and, doing a good job on it. It's just that she gets distracted so easily if her brother or sister is even in the room. She gets distracted and she can't finish it.
Actually, before we came to this meeting, Missy had put an intervention in place for work completion before we were really trying to figure out what exactly was going on. And so I'm sure you've seen some of these come home, but Chandler was getting stickers every time she was able to complete an assignment independently, and that was just something Missy was doing in her classroom. And then Missy targeted on a daily basis and tracked how much she was actually getting done. So of those assignments during literacy, what was actually getting completed.
So she really liked the reward system, but it's not enough it's more extrinsic than intrinsic rewards.
Then when we talked at our pre-consultation meeting, Missy and I really sat down to take a look at this, and we asked ourselves some questions, and what it really came down to is it feels like Chandler has a pretty limited control over her on-task behavior. Do you notice, does it feel like she's in control of it at home, or that it just sort of...
No, it just seems like it's out of control. Even simple tasks like picking up her room, she gets distracted so easily, and so we've had to make her a little incentive sticker chart for her chores and things, and she really doesn't have very many stickers on it.
Lisa did come into my classroom and she did monitor Chandler. So
We
can
did.
kinda
When we
see
were
where she's
looking at trying to figure out where we were going, if it was a work completion issue or if it was really an on-task issue, I went in and did some observations during that literacy block, since that's really where we were seeing those concerns. And the data that I collected showed Chandler on task. I did just partial interview observation. She was on task about 40% of the time on average. So that's meaning that 60% of the time she's not really getting things done that she could be getting done, or necessarily focusing as much, which is why Missy and I thought it was a really good idea to come to the table now and get some intervention in place. When Missy and I were talking about intervention, we think that we really need something to help her learn how to monitor her own behavior. Okay.
One of the suggestions in this book was to have a student self-monitor by using a beeping or chiming system that is sounded through a CD. And then they would circle either a yes or a no to say if they were on task when they heard that chime or that beep. And they were just random intermittent beeps that would go off.
And I have a program. I've used that before with students, and I used a kind of whole group at first, but we could also, if we needed to, hook it up to a CD player or whatever, so it's not distracting to the whole class.
Well, and I could have her sit up next to me still, so that I'm kind of monitoring her and making sure that other students aren't playing with the CD player or anything like that.
What was great about it was they could be rewarded for being on task, but at the same time, it helped them get a sense of what being on task felt like versus off-task behavior. This is a great teaching opportunity for them.
I think that's ultimately what we want, is for Chandler to be able to independently say, hey, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and be able to check herself to increase that on-task behavior.
But as the year goes on and she loses out on those opportunities to reinforce learning, I think the concern becomes that gap begins to widen, and it sounds like it's a pretty significant gap
What is
right
the
now.
gap right now?
The gap right now is a 2.
Okay.
So,
So,
because we can't expect, especially a first grader, to be on task 100% of the time. But if we expect 80% of the time, we really could provide something extrinsic so that she feels like this is something exciting that we're doing with her, and not that she's being penalized for not being as successful as we'd like in the classroom. That would be helpful. So perhaps when she meets her personal goal, and we can set that goal different from 80%, because I think that might be hard right at first. Once she meets her personal goal, we're able to reinforce her with either time alone with you or with rock shop tickets or something tangible that she'd like.
What I have in our form, though, is that we're going to use a pulse tone and our percentile. What do we come up with?
The target,
yeah.
would be 80%. She's at 40% now, which gives us that 2 gap, and we'd like to close that.
And what progress monitoring are we going to use?
What I can do is just keep coming in on a weekly basis and take data like I did the baseline data. So we know she's at 40% now, and I can come in on a weekly basis and do an observation and check on task behavior, then with the hope that she's on task more and more frequently. And then next time we meet, we can see what kind of adjustments we need to make based on how successful this has been.
And as the classroom teacher, I will make sure that I'm taking the yes and no chart if she's on task, and Lisa and I can meet to figure out, well, how often is she on task? Where are the breakdowns to when she's not on task? I can also I have some of her previous work before putting this intervention into place, and then I will take some of her post work after the intervention and just kind of see if we see a change in that.
I would love to see her be successful with this. I think it would really help her on down the road as she continues through her education.
And we will have a lot of parent-teacher contact, is that writing notes or phone calls, so that Chandler knows that we're
in constant communication.
So if that sounds good to you, we do need your permission anytime we provide an intervention that we're not providing to all students. We do need parent permission for that. So does this sound okay to you?
It sounds wonderful, thank
Okay,
you.
then let me,
I'm going to print this out for you so you can have a hard copy to take home. Okay. And as we have meetings, you can refer back to it and kind of keep a file on it.
and what this says is that it's okay for her to be in our problem-solving process, that we're going to provide some targeted interventions that not all the students are getting, and that if at some point we're still scratching our heads and trying to figure out what's best for Chandler in order to make her successful, we may do some targeted assessments to really get in that. So
When's our next meeting?
thank you. Our next meeting, we'll go ahead and meet again in 6 weeks. We'll take all the data to and figure out how successful we've been. So that would put us right after break. Does that work for you?
Yes.
And we have any time open between 2:45 and 3:45. What works best?
The latest time possible.
The latest? Okay, then we will work on 3:45. And I'll make sure that Missy or I give you a call and remind you when the meeting comes up. Does that sound good?
Sounds great, thanks.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Get set, go. Good. Can you hear? Okay, fix them if you need to. Ready? Okay, go.
Chandler's meeting for the problem-solving team is next week, and I just wanted to talk with you briefly about how you feel the intervention's going. How has it been going in the classroom?
I can tell that there's been a big change with Chandler getting her work done in the independent work time during literacy. I think that she's doing a much better job during that time.
And assessments are showing progress. Is she able to get through some more of that work?
Assessments are showing progress, especially in her reading assessments. You can tell that at the beginning of the year, she started off and her scores were not very good, and throughout the last month, she's been doing a much better job.
I know that as part of the intervention, we really wanted her to be able to start refocusing herself when she's not hearing the beeps. Are you noticing that more during literacy?
I'm noticing it in literacy time during the independent work time.
Good. Well, and I have some really good data to share. So, I mean, I know that you've seen me in there
Yes.
once a week.
Thank you for coming in.
Of course, and I've been in with Chandler. And so what I do is I take a look at her every 30 seconds and assess whether or not she's on task or not on task. And I know we went over with Chandler what that looks like.
Yes.
And look at how well she's doing. Wow. So this is her baseline when I went in right before that first meeting. And then as we've progressed, we're always going to see some slight up and down.
But she's not flatlining at all.
Not at all. She's really made a lot of progress. And this is not when she's intervened. So there's no beeps involved. It's just when she's doing that independent work and literacy. And so if our target is 80%, she's really set to hit that pretty soon, which is
Yes.
wonderful. How do you feel overall about continuing that until she hits her 80% mark?
Well, I feel very good about doing it during the literacy time,
Okay.
independent work time. But I'm noticing that she's starting to exhibit the same behaviors in math and in writing.
Really?
So now in writing, now they're doing short, simple sentences,
Uh-huh.
and she's getting through half the sentence and then getting unfocused and off task and not wanting to do it. And I also notice it in math because the math has been getting harder.
Is it
So-
similar behaviors when she gets off task? Is it similar in terms of playing in her desk or just sort of
Very
staring
similar.
off?
Very
Okay.
similar. I thought it was just in literacy, but looking back, it's been happening throughout
look.
the year. And so the assessments and even completion of work in math and then in writing, you can tell throughout the year. It's been happening.
Okay, and
Just
you're right.
maybe more noticeable now because I'm seeing her do such a better job in literacy time.
I can come in and do some baseline data again in math and writing so that we get that gap. But what I'd like to see is, I mean, we had that huge gap, and we've really been able to narrow that down in literacy. And so if we're able to get some baseline data in math and writing, I could potentially come in if we broadened the intervention to include those two areas. So maybe she gets it once a day in each area, and if we saw growth like that and we could close that gap, we potentially wouldn't have to meet on her too many more times.
I would love to see that.
Okay, then that's what we will do. So if you could, I know we meet next week, if you could make sure that Mr. and Mrs. Thomas are
I
invited,
will let them know.
then we'll be set.
Thank you for all your help.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming to our review meeting. Just to catch everybody up, we are reviewing on Chandler, and last time she came to the problem-solving process, we were concerned about her on-task behavior within that literacy block, and particularly within literacy during independent work. So she was able to follow Missy during direct instruction, but then when given a task, was often fiddling at her desk or looking at a wall, talking to a peer, some things like that. And I know that Mrs. Thomas had some concerns about the homework completion piece as well. So we implemented an intervention in which Chandler was able to use the CD player and the headphones and listen to beeps, intermittent beeps, throughout a specific time period. I think it's 15 minutes, and kept track of her own self-monitoring around whether or not she was on task or not on task. And to operationalize that, we were really looking at, was she listening to Missy if Missy was giving directions, or was she engaged in actively doing the task that was in front of her? When I went in and did progress monitoring once a week, we saw great improvement in terms of where she's able to be. So she started out at 40%. We had talked about that being a gap of 2, a pretty significant gap. She dipped down after that first week, but since then has really made some pretty tremendous gains in terms of being able to be on task during that independent period in literacy. So, Mrs. Thomas, what we always look at is this trend line here. And in the case of behavior and on task, we want a minimum of 80% of the time that she's really on task and focused. And so, as you can tell, this aim line is really going to get us there in a pretty short time. Now, Missy, do you want to talk about her self-monitoring and what that looked like with the rewards?
Well, I think she's doing a great job. Do you want to talk about home first, and then I'll come back to this?
We have used the CD at home.
Great.
And we've put it in the stereo and actually used it with all my children when they're working on their homework. And it seems to have really helped Chandla stay on task and get her work finished without, one of us trying to remind her of what she's supposed to be doing.
Wonderful.
So she's starting to take on that responsibility herself.
Great.
And Chandla, during literacy block, during the independent time, she's done a much better job, especially on the open court assessments and doubles, and she's even done a better job getting her work done. The only problem that I'm seeing is that she is now taking that off-task behavior into writing and science and math. And math was such a strong point for her that it concerns me that she's starting to be off task during that time.
When Missy and I talked at our consultation meeting before this meeting, we really tried hard to figure out if this off-task behavior in the other years was something that always existed and we just didn't notice, or if it really was a product of the current intervention. And what we did was we took a look at her assessments in the other areas and took a look at the amount of work she was completing in those areas. And it really seems like Chandla is off task throughout the day. And so what we'd like to do is expand the intervention and help that generalize to all the areas. And so Chandla will not only be able to use that on a daily basis in literacy, but also in math and writing, and then in science on the days that you have science. And we'll progress monitor those different areas as well to hopefully see these same gains across math, writing, and science too, so that overall she's on task and we're being able to generalize that information.
And I would like to go back to the reward piece.
Please.
She loves it. She loves getting to spend extra time with me. She loves going to Rock Shop and, getting to spend her ticket. So I really want to continue that into the writing, into the math, and into the science part.
In another 6 weeks, we will go ahead and meet again. We'll look at the progress. Would you like to continue this at home?
Yes,
Okay,
I would.
good.
It's
Well, then we'll
working well.
keep sending that home, and I will go ahead and progress monitor in multiple areas so that we're able to make sure that in math, in writing, in science and social studies, we're seeing this same trend line. And then when we meet again, we can see how successful that was across the board. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah.
Is late in the afternoon still the best for you, Ms.
Yes,
Thomas?
please.
Okay. Then we'll put her in for Wednesday the 14th at 3:45.
I have a question. At
Yeah.
what point will she no longer need the intervention piece?
That's a great question. What we'd like to see, if our target is 80% like this, we'd like to see that across the board. So we'd like to see it in reading, writing, math, and science, and then obviously at home as well. And as you can tell, we started out with a gap of 2, and we want to close that to 1. So since then, just in literacy, she's closed that from a 2 to a 1.2. So we're going to look for that to get to be a 1, and then we're going to look for that gap to close in the other areas as well. So once that's closed, if there are no other really significant issues that we're seeing with Chandla, and she's such a great girl in class that I don't foresee any big issues, then we wouldn't need the problem-solving team anymore.
Okay.
Does that sound okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming.
And we'll see you next time around.
Okay.
All right.